Blog Talk Radio.
You have just tuned in to an episode of Paranormal Horizons with your hosts, Jason Ophir, Sherry Pang, and Maria Wilson Duff. Stay tuned as we enter into the world of the paranormal, a world of ghosts, UFOs, and generally anything unexplained. The show is about to begin. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for tuning into another episode of Paranormal Horizons. We have a trifecta tonight. It will be myself, Maria Wilson Duff, and Sherry Pang. We got the girls and the guy. We have a great returning guest tonight. Sherry and Maria, how's it going?
Very good, Jason. Very, very good. Enjoying the weather and just kicking back and just staying home for a day.
Well, you got to like that. Now, Sherry, you got us a great returning guest tonight, and we were just talking to him a little bit before the show. Why don't you fill the listeners in on what we got going?
Okay, so we have a special returning guest. I consider him a regular because he's been on our show quite a numerous times in the last 3-4 years, and it's always a pleasure to have Bryan Ouellette. And Bryan, if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly, go ahead when we get pulling on air that you can correct me. But this gentleman is just, he's the real deal. I personally love him. It's great. His energy and his purpose of helping those that have problems with the dark side is just phenomenal. And I just have so much respect for this guy, Bryan, and it's really a privilege to have him on air because he's just a wealth of knowledge. He's personable. He's honest. I can't say enough good things about him, so it's really a pleasure to have him back on our show.
Absolutely. Hopefully it won't give me nightmares. Maria, what have you been up to lately?
Oh, the usual. Trying to stay out of trouble and working all the time. I'm trying to keep up with all the paranormal stuff that's coming out now with all the supposedly disclosures and things like this. But my heart is totally into the paranormal more than it is the UFO stuff. So I'm pretty excited about having Bryan coming back tonight because he is the real deal.
Absolutely.
So we'll go ahead and we'll bring him on right now. Hey, Bryan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So we were talking a few minutes before the show started, and I guess you were on an episode of Ghost Adventures. Was it last night?
It was. It aired last night. Panic in Amarillo, and certainly one of the more controversial episodes of Ghost Adventures, certainly the most controversial one that I've been involved with. And, I've been following social media since it aired. And, it's got a lot of people riled up and angry. And some people are even blaming me. So we should probably start off, if it's okay with you guys, talking about what I can discuss about that episode and kind of lead into how it was, an important production for the work that we do.
Absolutely. I did want to add one quick note. I will be bailing out at 9, and Maria and Sherry will continue the show for an additional half an hour, so I just wanted to throw that out there. But I'm really interested to hear about this, so tell us more about this episode.
Well, yeah, okay. This one was presented to me and the Ghost Adventures crew as an alleged demonic attack that was going after a family that had a 3-year-old child involved. And, certainly when there are children involved, it sort of takes the investigation to a new level, because now you're dealing with something that is very serious, an attack on an innocent of somebody that is naturally vulnerable, really raises a lot of red flags for us when we get a case like this. And, this was young. I mean, we don't usually see cases with children that young being afflicted by this kind of demonic attack. So, I was called in to go out and take a look at what was going on there and help the GAC assess the authenticity of the claims, which is what they pretty much rely on me to do now. That's part of my role with the show, and why people are always saying, why aren't you on more? Well, you don't want me on that show too often, because typically when I'm on that show, it's because somebody's having a really bad problem. Most of the time that's not a good thing, and it's a lot better when I'm not on the show, just because that means nobody's having any issues like this that at least are come to the GAC's attention. But anyway, they called me in, and of course, I will always, if I'm in town and available, I will always make myself available for a case that they need help with. And certainly they only typically call me in to cases that are of the utmost severity, or at least appears that way. But that's part of my role, to come on and help them to make that assessment. So, we got there, and the environment was definitely spiritually charged. There was no question about that. I did feel certain things in that home that is typical of other places I have investigated that had activity, not necessarily demonic, but there was definitely that sensation. But, as the investigation progressed, and what you see in the episode that aired last night was very organic. It definitely did an excellent job, showing step by step the highlights of each moment that we encountered while we were investigating. And, of course, when you're in the midst of an investigation and all of the activities going on, the crew there and the family and other things, you're trying to get as much information in a short period of time, and you don't always catch everything until after you've had a chance to go back and look at the footage and see everything that you could not see while you were there in person. And so, this family was claiming that they were being attacked, specifically with scratches that were occurring on the mother's back as well as on the 3-year-old child. And other members of the family reported scratches, but they were not present. So when I got there, the only people that were present from the family were the mom, the dad, and the 3-year-old child. And so, I always go into every investigation with an open mind. I do not subscribe to the opinion that everything is paranormal. In fact, I've done this work long enough to know that most of the time it's not. And that's one of the frustrations of being a professional paranormal investigator, particularly one that's working through a ministry with the primary goal of seeking out to expose demonic activity and eradicate it from a person's life. It's frustrating when your time is being consumed by things that are not demonic or even not paranormal, and sometimes psychological in nature, or even malingering can be a factor there. And it's even more so, I think we've talked about this on previous episodes that I've done with this show. Sometimes now that, because I am a big name in the mass consciousness in terms of exorcism ministry, they've seen me on Ghost Adventures, I think 6 times or so, and people have equated me to being an expert in this field, which I am. However, the drawback to having had so much exposure is that now I think people see me as a way to maybe get on television. And so, there are some, so sometimes I think they think that I send Zach cases or that they're my cases and I call Zach and he comes out and we do an investigation. That's not how it works. I've never given Zach a case. It's usually something that's happening through his process with the show. I get called in only when he is in the midst of his normal work, needing help with it at that level where he feels that a family might need liberation from a suspected event. So, I don't, calling me or trying to get me to take your case is not going to get you on Ghost Adventures, and it's not going to necessarily get you on television. In fact, it likely won't. So, I that's something I've had to deal with in my own ministry, and we've had to create a much more advanced vetting process because we have so many cases now, far more than we'll ever be able to take. And we know that a great deal of them are not genuine cases, although they're very serious to the client. So, with that in mind, I still, when I take a case or when I accept a case and, or Zach calls me in, I do my very best to go in with an open mind. However, I still expect to be convinced by the evidence. I don't go in immediately assuming this is demonic or paranormal in nature. I never do that. I always want to be convinced by the evidence. And if it's a genuine event, that's very easy to accomplish. You don't really need to go through a great amount of investigating to uncover a genuine demonic event. It becomes pretty obvious, to somebody that's doing it as long as I have. I've known what to look for in the various things, but there's always going to be that one case where it could kind of go either way. And, you never want to, I've been fooled a few times. I mean, there's been times where I was convinced that there was nothing going on, and all of a sudden it revealed itself. And there were times where I thought there was something that was genuine, and through the course of the assessment process revealed that it wasn't. So, even the best of us still, there is a certain amount of I guess, detective work that's required, and that's just par for the course in this type of ministry. So with this case, I went in with a very open mind, and I took the family very seriously, and I did my best to rest their minds and to take their claims seriously. And it was really, through the course of the investigation where things just were not happening. The normal events that we would expect to see, or the line of events or that we would expect to see in a genuine case, just were not present there. The only thing that I experienced the whole time was, like I said, there was a sensation that was similar to other spiritually active locations where there were hauntings and whatnot. But outside of just that vague feeling, there really wasn't anything concrete. The equipment wasn't really picking up anything. The guys weren't experiencing anything, and they're very tuned into this work. And so, I trust when they say they feel something, I take that seriously. It becomes part of my assessment process when I'm with them. So, none of those indicators were there. And it was only through the course of going back and looking at the footage and then actually seeing the episode for the first time last night that it became very clear to me that these scratches, which were the central part of this case that the mother was claiming to experience, and also the daughter, who could not speak for herself, but the family was saying she was getting scratched, it became very clear that it seemed as though the mother was doing this. And that was very disturbing, that would be going on. Now, some people on social media, and I want to rest their minds about this, okay, because some people were saying that they saw blood on the child's back and, that this was some kind of, child abuse. And I'm not saying that it wasn't a type of abuse. I'm not going to say either way. That's not my place. However, I will say that there was no blood, and the actual mark that was on the child's back that I witnessed, and the only time any of us witnessed it, was something that was hardly anything more than the kind of redness you would get if you scratched an itch. Okay, so we're not talking about like an aggressive, let's rip the child's skin off, and I know that people are jumping to conclusions on social media, and I want to make sure that that's clear, that nothing of that kind was witnessed at any point, and maybe it looked more severe on camera, but it really wasn't. I blessed the child's back. I blessed the red area with holy water. If there was blood, I wouldn't have touched the child because, you don't know whether or not a person has some type of blood-related infection. I would have taken different precautions. So, that's something that I wanted to make clear because there's a lot of questions about that on social media about this particular case last night. And then another thing that people are asking and demanding and going crazy about is whether or not CPS was called because of not just the suspicion that the mother was causing the scratches to both herself and the daughter, but also the overall filth of the house, which I will admit the house was in very bad shape. It was very dirty in there. It was filthy. And I'm not going to lie, it was very obvious on camera. And so people wanted to know whether or not CPS was called. Now, I need to make very clear that even though this is a high-profile case, okay, high-profile in the sense that it was aired on national television. Well, it was aired on international television because Ghost Adventures is an international show. It's aired all over the world. And, we've got fans from all over the world that follow all of us, the GAC and all of the extended guests that have been on the show, like, Patty Negri and, regulars. And, the fact of the matter is, okay, we can't, even though it's a public case, talk about some of the confidential specifics that go on in the follow-up stage of an investigation. And so when I'm asking everybody who is a fan of Ghost Adventures or has watched this episode and is outraged by what they saw, I'm encouraging them to understand that we are professionals, okay, and we do take into consideration mundane factors when we go into an investigation. That includes the GAC, okay? Yes, you get to see a show and it's entertainment and, it's fun to watch the guys investigate and react to an EVP or, some kind of stick figure on the SLS. I understand that. But what is more important to realize is that they are very professional people. It's a very professional group, okay? And, travel has legal teams and productions have legal teams that guide through the process of these types of things. So I can't talk about the follow-up because that part of the investigation is confidential. We have to respect the dignity of the family, regardless of whether or not you like them. And just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean that we're not actively pursuing a follow-up of some kind that is best for the well-being of that family. We always do that. And I wouldn't be involved in any kind of investigation that did not do that because I know firsthand that most investigations where there's a claim of demonic activity turn out to be like the one that you saw last night on Ghost Adventures. That's a very honest portrayal, and really, in reality, Zach Bagans should be applauded for showing it to you. Now, I know a lot of people said the whole episode should have been scrapped, and they shouldn't have showed it this was exploiting the child, it's child abuse and all this stuff. Look, okay, first of all, other than the filthy house, there was nothing at any point during the investigation to indicate that the child was being abused in any physical way, okay? It was only through looking at the footage after the fact that it became suspicious that maybe she might have been scratching the child, okay? But we're not talking, again, like, razor blades here, okay? We're talking about like scratching an itch. The child had very fair skin, and it would obviously react with redness. Even my skin, I'm a very Mediterranean skin tone. I've got a lot of Italian in me. And, even when I scratch my back, there'll be a nice big red mark on there, okay? It doesn't hurt, any more than it hurts when you scratch your back. Okay, that's the kind of scratches we were seeing that night, okay? I don't know if there's other things going on. There very well could be, but that's not for my ministry to find out. That's for other entities that are working with the family to work through if there's anything like that, okay? So I ask that everyone respect the dignity of this family. I ask that everyone respect the Ghost Adventures crew and their professionalism, as well as the professionalism of my ministry, okay? We're not new to this work. We know what we're doing. And that's all I really can say about it, because it would not be professional of me to come on the air and just, spill the beans on all these things that are really personal matters now. You got the episode, but, there's, and understand that going to an investigation is an expensive thing for a production crew. Productions cost a lot of money to make. And so you can't just scrap something when you've invested a lot of time and money in a family that asked for help, okay? So, there's going to be a lot of, obviously, dissension either way, but I'm trying to appeal to the rationality of people and understand that, this is the real side of paranormal investigation. It's not all ghosts. It's not all EVPs. It's not all talking to the dead. It's not all finding demons. It's not all demonic possessions and blessings in holy water and, all that stuff. Okay, that's the rare stuff. Okay, most of the time it's going to be people who are emotionally, psychologically disturbed or potentially even malingering for attention. And maybe they don't even realize that that's what they're doing. It's just what some people do. Okay, we encounter that all the time. And I have seen many, many cases like Amarillo that were far worse than that. So honestly, for the audience that doesn't want to believe me, well, all I can say to you is that you weren't there. I was. So at least take my word for it, because I'm not going to lie to you. I have nothing to gain by it. Okay. But that's, I think something that needed to be said. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to kind of discuss that because, paranormal investigating, a lot of people want to get into it. They think it's fun. They think it's cool. Let's go hunt ghosts. But, so much of it is just waiting around for something to happen. And most of the time, or at least maybe not most of the time, but a good part of the time, nothing happens. That's the way it is. And, I really applaud Zach for showing that, because he could have – people are always accusing the Ghost Adventures crew of fabricating evidence. Oh, it's reality television. It's all fake. No, it's not. I wouldn't be involved in it if it was all fake. None of it's fake. What you see is what you get. And last night's episode, that's what we got. It wasn't much of anything, and I know people were disappointed because, when they see me come on, they're like, oh, this is going to get good. It's going to get really bad. There's going to be demons. We're going to see an exorcism. And certainly, of course, the show promotes that aspect of it, as it needs to, because it is, in the end, a television show that has, a certain needs it and needs to meet. But, at the very end, it's also a family. It's real lives. It's real ministry. It's real work. It's real assessment. And, real paranormal investigating is not always that interesting. So
I think it adds a lot of
credibility.
I think it adds a lot of credibility to the show. to be able to show that other side of it. I'm always one of these skeptics whenever I watch Ghost Adventures. I'm like, come on, this can't be real. I watched one that was on, I don't know if it was like YouTube, or it was like the Island of the Dolls, in Mexico, I think it is. And then there's this fire that randomly starts, and one of the dolls starts crying or laughing, and I'm like, oh, come on, really? But I trust what you say. If you're telling me from your experience of being on the show a bunch of times, if it's real, next time I watch, I'll take it to heart. I mean, if it's real, it's real.
Well, that does happen. I mean, honestly, we've had in my ministry completely, even in cases where we've investigated where we didn't even turn on a camera, where we were taking it so nonchalantly that we didn't even feel that it was worth recording. We have had situations where, dolls have said words that they're not programmed to say. These are things that do happen in the course of these types of events. And we've experienced that. I can't talk to that episode. I wasn't on it. I wasn't involved back in those days. But it does happen. I've seen it for myself. And people ask me a lot about the haunted doll phenomenon, because they really want to know what really is going on here. Can a demon or a spirit actually go inside a toy and animate it and make it do things? Annabelle. Most recently, I don't know if you guys were aware of this, but a few weeks ago, I was down on the set of Conjuring 3, which is the Conjuring series is part of a overall story arc that involves Annabelle, the Nun, these horror movies that are really popular right now, following the cases of the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren. And they do a really good job. In fact, it's my favorite horror series of all time. The only horror movie what I might put above it is Poltergeist, but that's just because, that's nostalgia for me. I kind of grew up on that one, and it's a classic. Come on, I mean, it's there'll never be anything like that again. But Conjuring comes pretty close, and they really do it in a style that is very much like the old 1970s kind of horror. So it's really very dark, and it kind of leaves you wondering sometimes about what's really lurking there. They do a really good job of not always showing you, but you just know that there's something there, but they don't really show it to you, which makes it a lot more frightening. And I just like that kind of horror. I've always been fascinated by it, and I enjoy that. So to be asked by the production crew to come down to bless the entire set, cast, and crew of the Conjuring series was really an honor. And so I of course accepted and went down, and they I got to meet Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, and the directors and the producers and all the other actors. And they were so gracious and wonderful. I really, I was asked to be there at 6:30 in the morning so that we could get ready. And the casting call, this was the first day of shooting for the new movie Conjuring 3, which will be coming out sometime next year. And I was asked to be there at 6:30 right before casting call at 8. And anybody on the casting crew that wanted to participate in the blessing was invited to be there. And I really expected a very small turnout. I thought, well, Hollywood's probably not too into, Catholic spirituality. Maybe just a few Catholics that are on set might come. I really didn't expect much. And I was really overwhelmed with the response that it seemed like every single person actually showed up, even the big stars did. And it was wonderful, and they were really very gracious. After I blessed them and blessed the entire set, or several sets actually, because the movie's actually taking up several sound stages. Patrick and Vera came over to me and thanked me, and we had a nice conversation, and the other actors came over and did the same. It was really very nice. And one of the things that I wanted to do there, and this is something that I shared with everybody, when you do a horror movie, and this is more, I'm going to get a little esoteric and metaphysical, but I think your audience and yourselves will find this interesting. the reason we bless horror movies like this, and, Conjuring's always asked a priest to come on set. This is the first time I was asked, but every Conjuring movie, every Annabelle movie, and The Nun included, has had a priest come to bless the cast, crew, and set. And the reason that this is done is because it is very common for horror producers or actors, anybody that's involved in a horror production, to actually start to experience paranormal phenomena associated with the content of the film. It's very common. And
I heard that about the movie The Exorcist.
Yes, and Poltergeist too. They used real skulls. They used real skeletons, if you recall. And there was even the Poltergeist curse that was said to happen. A lot of actors, died in kind of not mysterious ways, but tragic ways. And, it just, there is this phenomenon. It does happen. And so, it rests people's mind when a priest comes, and particularly this time they wanted an exorcist to come and bless the set and the crew, anybody that wanted it. And so what is really interesting is that when you're dealing with dark archetypes, okay, the universe, the cosmos, does not really know the difference between fact and fiction. Nonfiction, fiction does not matter. The cosmos just creates. It responds to our thoughts. And if an actor is worth any good, if they're even remotely talented at what they do, okay, if they're worth their paycheck, then they should be doing such a great job that it even fools the cosmos and starts to actually produce the effect that they are simulating through the performing arts, which makes performing arts a very dangerous activity when you think about it. And so I explained that to them, and I told them why we were doing the blessing, and I also wanted to, of course, bless some of the artifacts on the set. And one of the things that I asked for was, I want to see all of the relic room, where the Warrens keep all of their. Now these are movie props, of course, but I wanted to see them and I wanted to bless them, and they, of course, graciously let me do this. And the reason that's important is because these things can, through the course of the performance, take on a life of their own. And this is exactly how dolls and various toys, or particularly toys that were very much loved by their owners, can start to take on a sort of life identity that can animate itself in a very subtle way, sometimes not so subtle, particularly when you're dealing with the darker things like the Conjuring movies do. So when we are dealing with, like you were talking about, the dolls, no, it's not a spirit going into a toy and animating it and making it do things. The real Annabelle doll, which is actually not like the one in the movie. It's more of a Raggedy Ann. It is Raggedy Ann, and a large one. And, it was said to write notes to the child. And there was a lot of, evil and tragedy associated with anywhere the doll was. And so, there's a darkness to it, and it's said to have a demonic attachment, which it very well could. But where does that come from? Is it because there was like some kind of, witchcraft or some kind of dark ritual that was performed, some kind of satanic rite? Probably not. In fact, in most cases, it's very unlikely that something of that magnitude would have taken place for this to become haunted in a way. What it is the projection of the owner into the doll itself. And so it is very common. In fact, I'm dealing with a case right now that's has this happening. It's very common when a beloved object that is in close proximity to a person that goes all the way up into their death, when they die, that the object will sort of move around, or maybe sounds will come out of it. And if it's a doll, it will have characteristics that were very much like what is reported with Annabelle. the real one. And so, what this is, and sometimes people think, oh, it's the person's not at rest and they're haunting and they're going towards the doll. And it's very unlikely that that's the case as well. What it almost always is that we have the power to create what are known as, in Buddhism, tulpas, and in a more Western metaphysical sense, they can be called egregores, where they affect large numbers of people, or large numbers of people can report the same thing, which is kind of the case with Annabelle. However, what really ends up happening is it's a thought form that's projected out. And we've talked on this show before about the 4 types of demons, and we've talked about, the fallen angels, of course, and the elementals and the wrathful spirits. But the one most underrated one, and the one that's kind of gets swept under the carpet, it's the most prolific, is the created demon. And that's when a person, out of their own trauma, usually emotional trauma, represses it or is not able to process that trauma. This is very common in sexual abuse. What they end up doing is it gets projected outwards, and as a means of the psyche dealing with it. So it can be repressed inward, where it just tears the person up inside, or it gets projected outward, where the person can take on at least the simulated appearance of normal functioning, and yet there's this now entity that sort of follows that person wherever it goes, wreaking havoc on that person's life, and now they think they're cursed, or they think there's a haunting, or there's something that's coming after them. They think there's a demon that's coming, trying to possess them. And for all intents and purposes, it really is that. However, it's not the way they think it is. It's not like a fallen angel that's doing a very traditional type of possession. This is being possessed by one's own trauma. And so I would
Don't a lot of people interpret that as a poltergeist?
Well, yeah, I think sometimes people do refer to it. Poltergeist, unfortunately, has a lot of definitions because there's really not a lot, unfortunately, standardization in the paranormal field yet. And you got a lot of different people from different backgrounds coming up with semantics and various other terminologies and ways of looking at things. And there's really nobody regulating it to say, well, no, we're going to look at it this way. We're going to use this term for that. There's nothing academic about it. Paranormal investigation, paranormal field is not an academic field of study. In fact, academia more or less shuns it. Even parapsychology is not respected. So there's no one doing any regulating. So you got people that can self-proclaim themselves experts coming into the field and making all sorts of claims, writing books. And, if the book is good enough, these New Age publishers will publish it. If they think they can make money on it, they put it on the shelves. They don't really discriminate too closely at what might be garbage, and people read it and take it for face value, and now you've got another addition to the field that doesn't make any sense. So poltergeist, unfortunately, has a lot of terms. It's in its most traditional sense, what it really is like a telekinetic kind of problem, usually the result of an emotionally charged teenager who is struggling through puberty. And that's when you see poltergeist activity most common. That's similar to a thought form, but not as defined and not necessarily as the result of trauma. So, yes, it can be poltergeist-like, and typically it will do things, it will wreak environmental havoc, and so people will often generalize it and say that's a poltergeist. And, that's not exactly inaccurate. People at least know generally what you mean when you say poltergeist. So it's got poltergeist-related activity, but I would prefer to use it when we're talking about an outward projection of an inner trauma. I would prefer to use the word created demon because it's exactly what it is. It becomes sentient. And the more energy that's put into it through the trauma, the more emotion that person has as the result of whatever that trauma was, it becomes more and more sentient as it goes. And this comes back to a very simple part of Judeo-Christian theology. And that is where it is very much stated as part of both Judaism and Christianity that mankind is made in God's image. And so we wonder about that. We say, well, does that mean that God looks like we do? And certainly there are, fundamentalists and literalists who take that biblical concept to a unhealthy degree and say, yeah, that's, God does look like us. He has 2 arms, 2 legs. He's got, long white beard sitting on a throne in the sky. That's a bunch of garbage. That's not true at all. But doesn't stop people from believing it. What it really means, though, when we say that God, created man in his image, and man, when we mean by man, we're talking mankind. So man and woman share this same thing equally. What it is it's the power of creation. We are creatures of creation. In fact, the very word creature is an extraction from the word creation. And so we create. That's what we do. At our most basic biological level, what do? We reproduce, right? We create more and more babies. That's kind of our most raw animal instinct, is to reproduce. Sexuality is a very intrinsic part to human identity. We see it now more than ever in the social environment with, people questioning what is gender, or can we choose who we want to be or how we want to be presented to the world? And should the world accept that at face value? Or should we look to sexuality in its biological sense and let that be the standard? These are the deep philosophical questions of today. And so, what it really amounts to, though, for our purposes, is that at the raw theological level of Judeo-Christian metaphysics, is that it means that we have the power to create. That's what God gave us. And so by virtue of that nature, the creative nature that we possess as his children, if we want to be theological about it, is the ability to do the same things that he can do, just not as well. So, he can create the perfection of the cosmos. We create little demon asses that go around, causing havoc. So, but that's kind of how it works. So that's what an actual haunted doll is 99% of the time.
Do you have any? You still there, Sherry?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
I think everybody's
Jason's
speechless after that one.
I totally.
Jason's gonna have nightmares.
I'm deep in thought.
Anything dark always gives me nightmares. But what you've always said in the show in the past has always resonated with me. It's about manifesting your things, and I totally believe that at least in some cases, that when you have this demonic activity, it's something that your subconscious or your spirit is manifesting in some sort of exterior way, and I totally get it.
It is. In fact, most demonic entities really are nothing more than projections of the depravity of human psyche, of the human psychology. It's the darkness within that finds its way out. And we forget that there's more to sentience than just the human intellect. There's more to sentience than just the brain. There is a fundamental property of awareness that is intrinsic to all things in nature. And in a way, all things are sentient on its own level. It's not the same kind of sentience. It's not the kind that we would call consciousness. Now, consciousness is unique to higher animals. I wouldn't say that an amoeba is conscious, but there's awareness there. There's some awareness there. Plants are not conscious, but there's awareness there. All things are aware. Even inanimate objects are aware. It's just not at the level that we respect, which is because we're operating at such a higher level where we have the properties of intellection, and we can use that information and process it to create things and to analyze things and to communicate things and record information for posterity. We kind of marginalize the rest of sentience in the cosmos. So we don't look at a rock and say there's sentience there. We don't look at a planet or a star and say there's sentience in those things. But there is. And we need to get to the point spiritually where we're ready to accept that reality.
Bryan,
I've always
what
wondered.
is your take on when we're talking about objects and people, the energy that's portrayed into an object? What do you think about people going into like a Salvation Army or Goodwill stores and they buy things that, you don't know about their past? I know a couple people personally that have bought things at Goodwill or Salvation Army, and then all of a sudden their house is kind of wreaking havoc, It's like there's things that are moving and presence supposedly known in their house that wasn't there when they didn't buy that object.
Well, that's a really good question, and it's something that I think is important. It's a question I get a lot on Twitter, and I don't unfortunately have enough characters to really answer those as completely as I'd like to. So I think a lot of information gets left out, and of course, not everyone reads every tweet, so it gets lost in the fray of the other tweets. So it's a good opportunity to kind of talk about that. In reality, how this works is that yes, there is always going to be risk when you purchase something that has already had another owner, because anything that you own, particularly something that you loved or something that you used a lot, is going to absorb your energy, whether you like it or not, whether you try to make that happen or not. That's just natural. Your energy will bleed into your environment and saturate all the things around you. So obviously clothing is a big one because, that's something that's pressed up against our bodies, absorbs, oils from our skin, which contains the vibratory essence of our nature. And that becomes part of the clothing, and that characteristic is imprinted into it on a metaphysical level. So let's say, for example, an object is in a living room. Let's say it's a candlestick that's in a dining room, and let's say a man and a woman get into a big fight. The man pulls out a gun and shoots the woman dead at the dining room table, and just a drop of blood splatters onto that candlestick. And at some point in the future, there's an estate sale, and that candlestick ends up in Goodwill, or it ends up in a flea market or some antique store, who knows. And you buy it, okay? The energy of that trauma has now been transferred into that object. And so that trauma comes home with you, which means that because we are creatures of creation and everything about us is sentient, every drop of blood is sentient. Every drop of blood is you in its entirety. You don't realize that because you only think of yourself as the whole sum of your parts. But every single part is the fullness of you. And so your trauma, or the event or the result or the consequence of your trauma, gets imprinted into the rest of the environment where the trauma took place. And so, therefore, that can become a cursed object in a sense. Not a real curse in the sense that, somebody put a curse on it, but the trauma creates a curse. And that becomes a haunted object. And it becomes a attachment point or a charged object that can create the source of paranormal activity that is malignant and would need to be eradicated through the course of what we would do, where we would do cleansings, exorcisms, or whatever would be required in that particular case. So I always tell people to be very careful of purchasing objects that were owned by other people because you simply don't know their history. There's no way to possibly know the history of these things. And honestly, we were talking about Zach Bagans. Well, his entire haunted museum is based upon this principle, and that's what makes the museum such a remarkable place, but also a very dangerous place spiritually, because it has a lot of confirmed objects in there that have a very dark history, and that energy is absorbed into it. And you've got these all confined in a small space. The museum's pretty surprisingly large. It doesn't look very large on the outside, but it's actually quite remarkably big inside. And it's very, they do it, they take you through it in a very convoluted way. So it really messes with your head when you're going through it. It's really kind of an interesting experience. But, you had all these objects in a very confined space with all these very dark attachments. And, very sensitive people will most certainly react to that, and some, will take that energy home with them and have problems. So the best thing that you can do, if you must buy something that's, been used by somebody else, is to cleanse it. So this is where you're not going to hear me say to use sage very often. This is one of the times where I highly recommend sage. In fact, this is perhaps the only real good use for sage. Think of sage as an abrasive spiritual cleaner. And so you would burn white sage, and preferably, and just let the object sit in that smoke regularly. You might want to do this several days, and just keep cleansing the object with that smoke from the white sage to completely neutralize it of any previous vibratory rates that might have been imprinted into the object through its history. And in a more Christian sense, then one can also get it blessed by a priest. It can be washed in holy water. In the Voodoo tradition in Santeria, there's a thing called Florida water that is very, very useful in removing negative or any vibration. And the reason I'm very cautious about sage is that sage, people think of it as it gets rid of negative energy. Actually, it gets rid of all energy. So if let's say you had your house just blessed by a priest, let's say you had me come out over and you said you're having some problems in your house, you want it blessed, and so I come and I do a full blessing on your home. And the next week, you're like, you know what? I had a really bad day. I'm going to burn some sage to kind of decompress from the energy. Well, that burning of sage in that house, you're neutralizing my blessing too. It washes it all away. So it brings it back to a 0 point metaphysically, and that's not a good use for it. Unfortunately, a lot of people do resort to sage first, and it will get rid of all of the positive influences in your environment as well as the negative. And when you do that, when you bring it down to a neutral point, then the closest thing to that environment comes right back to it. And most of the time, it's going to be negative. So what you're doing is you're clearing the space so that more negative energy can come in. So you got to be very careful with sage. But there are some uses for it, and that's when you want to neutralize an object. You don't want anything. You want to start over from scratch. So sage can take an object, like let's get back to that candlestick again. Let's say it has a negative attachment from the trauma of the murder. You would wash it in the smoke, and it just basically washes it clean as if it's a brand new object again at the metaphysical level. And so that's what I would recommend for antique collectors and that type of thing.
What happens
about
to the
burning
energy?
frankincense and myrrh? Like if you have an incense, how does that work?
Oh, those are good too. I think sage is a little better for being an abrasive neutralizer. Myrrh and frankincense tend to bring in higher vibrations. So, rather than washing away negative, you're kind of just sort of creating a conflict in the environment. So you can do it, and it will work, and it will definitely cleanse away minor things. But if you have a very strong negative, potentially demonic attached object, and you burn frankincense with it, you might even create more havoc in your environment because now you're creating conflicting energy, and that can even charge it further. This is why you have to be very careful doing these kinds of things on your own. It's much better to get a priest involved or somebody that knows how to work in this kind of thing.
Yeah,
what
and
happens
when you think about antiques, when I used to go to secondhand stores, I would go and see these books that are 1950, 1940s, 1920s. You never know what kind of energy that is attached to that.
No, you really don't.
Mm-mm.
You don't.
Well, what do you think, Maria?
Jason, you were trying to say something, Jason. What was your question?
What happens to all this energy when you cleanse something? Like, where does it go? Because doesn't science say energy never dies? Where's it being sent to?
Well, that's a good one too, because you're talking about the laws of thermodynamics that says that energy cannot be created or destroyed, and so people have used this in sort of like the New Age and metaphysical movements to explain why there's life after death. This proves it. It doesn't prove it. What it does is the laws of thermodynamics state that energy cannot be created or destroyed. This is true, but it doesn't say anything about it having to remain cohesive. So where the energy goes is you're breaking down the cohesion of the vibration, and that's what neutralizes it. So the energy just goes back into the ether, but it no longer has any form to do anything. So when you talk about a negative vibration versus a positive vibration, what those are cohesive patterns of energy. These neutralizers like sage break down those patterns and they just dissipate, and so the energy just goes everywhere. Think of it this way. Like, let's say I give you, you remember like playing with watercolors as a child? Where, when you wash off your paintbrush, the water would turn, like, let's say you were playing with red paint. As you kept putting the brush in the water, the water would get red, right?
Right.
What if you took the vial of red water and poured it into a swimming pool? It just dissipates. Now, the paint's still in there, but it no longer has enough cohesive form to show the color red. It just gets washed out in the overwhelming energy of the rest of the pool, and so the universe just kind of washes it out, and it just gets absorbed into every other aspect of the universe, and it's neutralized.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna bust out of here. So, Bryan, I will say goodbye. I want to thank you again for coming on. It's always great.
Oh, I always enjoy this. Thank you, Jason.
And I'm gonna leave this to these two lovely ladies. Maria, do you have the dashboard open?
No, but I will right now.
Okay. You can run it. I'm out. Thanks again, Bryan.
Thank you.
Take care, Jason.
See ya.
Wow, that's crazy. Because I have sage, but I don't burn sage because I don't like the smell of it personally. So I have a diffuser, and I burn sage in a diffuser.
Mm-hmm. And
so,
and that's not going to be as strong as the actual smoke itself. I just caution people with sage because sage will always neutralize everything. And the problem with that is nature abhors a vacuum, and that's true for the non-corporeal as well as it is for the corporeal world. So just as it is in the corporeal world, the same thing will be true at the non-physical level. So when you create a vacuum, which is what sage does, it neutralizes to the point where it brings everything back to a 0 point. Then the closest thing is going to that 0 point is going to fill that space. And just by nature of our particular place in the metaphysical universe, the demonic is the closest thing to this reality. And so typically speaking, when you neutralize space, the demonic is the thing that's the first to come in and replace it. That's why you have to be careful.
That's crazy. Wow, thank you. What do you think, Maria?
I'm thinking about all the weird stuff that's happened since I've been on the phone. Which that tends to happen. I know that. Telephone calls kind of get interrupted and things like that. But I am amazed at the different energy changes. And I wonder if your theory on this, sometimes do you feel like a negative energy wave that seems to sweep through a large area at one time?
Yeah, I mean, it does come in waves, and that's, again, kind of related to what we were just talking about, how there's cohesive patterns of energy. And, these patterns of energy are finite. They're not eternal in any way. They do have boundaries in which they maintain their cohesion, just like the human body is an energy pattern, but it has limitations. I mean, it's typically, 4 to 6 feet of height. You got, people that are thin and skinny. You got people that are overweight. But there's like limits to how large a person can get. You're not going to find somebody that's 20 feet tall because the energy pattern can't reach that level of magnitude and maintain cohesion. It would break apart. And certainly you start to see that with people that have certain disorders like giantism, where they do exceed the boundaries of the way that pattern is designed to be operational or functional, and the result is not usually very good. They usually have health problems and other things that limit their lifespan. Same thing with dwarfism. There's usually a plethora of health problems as a result, and that's, again, directly related to the fact that the vibration is compromised in a way that it's not free-flowing. It's not at its functional state where it should be in its homeostasis point and operating at its, at its optimal level, which we would consider to be normal. But energy is the same way. Okay, so you do have waves of energy that are finite. There's limits to how big these waves can be. But they can be much larger than a human body. Naturally, they can encompass an entire acre of land, or it might be just confined to a room. And this is what anybody that does paranormal investigating will be familiar with. There's going to be places you go to where it seems like all the activity is concentrating to one room, or maybe it's an entire property. Sometimes it's an entire neighborhood. We've seen that. And that's just the nature of energy and how these patterns grow and are facilitated, and how much energy they have to work with in the first place, and how strong they are to maintain cohesion. What an exorcist does with negative energy is the exorcist comes in and disassembles that pattern and breaks it down and eradicates it. Unfortunately, some exorcists are not trained properly in this technique, and they are taught that there's a evil spirit that must be cast out and sent to hell, maybe. I don't know. There's lots of theological concepts that come out of exorcism ministry that are taught to aspiring exorcists within the church. However, that's not a very good way of teaching it, and it's not as effective as teaching about energy patterns and how to dissipate them. Because you'll be much more effective as an exorcist if you know how to recognize negative energy patterns and how to literally break them down back into the ether so that they can no longer cause harm to the victim.
I got a question. With the demons that you've encountered in your experience, have they been there when a person experiences them, or do you think that they attract them, or is it both?
It could be either or both. Sometimes a person will gain an attachment in a very benign way. They might be just walking through the mall and accidentally bump into somebody that has an attachment, and the attachment transfers over to them. And now they've got one, and they come home, and it's maybe a minor attachment, but it's still an attachment, and it's negative and malevolent in nature, but it's not strong, so they might not recognize anything. Maybe they just feel a little woozy, or they start having chronic headaches, or maybe they're having strange bouts of diarrhea for no reason. They don't know why. They go to the doctor, and the doctor says, I don't, there's nothing wrong with you, but yet they have all these symptoms. That can be very subtle. But if that type of attachment is not rectified expeditiously, then what it does is it becomes a magnet for stronger, more malevolent forces. And like attracts like. That's one of the occult laws that applies, whether you like the occult or not, whether you're afraid of it or not. It's just a fact of the metaphysical world. Like attracts like. So if there's something of a malignant nature attached to an individual, then other malignancies will soon come in. And we had a case quite recently with a demonic possession where the client was a victim of a type of curse that was placed on her. It was a South American type of curse, folk magic type of thing, where a tulpa was created and sent at her. Thought form was sent at her to harm her and make her sick, which it did very successfully. But she did not rectify it quickly enough, and just got sicker and sicker to the point that she could no longer work, and then eventually reached the point of full-blown classic demonic possession, at which point she sought our help. And it was very interesting because the first time we started the resolution process with this client, she immediately went into full demonic possession. We were not obviously prepared for a full rite of exorcism, the solemn rite. So what we ended up having to do is, try to minor rite to just get her back to normal consciousness and to kind of ask her, because she had lost consciousness at that point, which is very common and typical in these extreme forms of possession. We were able to get her, of course, back to demonic possession, to normalcy, and what we thought was remove the demonic possession. And, it was gone. And she, right after the exorcism, she started feeling perfectly normal again. She started to act in a way that her family hadn't seen her act in years. And we thought, wow, this was a success. We knocked it out in the first shot. We were really proud of ourselves and sent her on her way. And, of course, we do follow-ups, and we, call the client on a regular basis, make sure they're still doing good. And, a week or two went by, and she was fine, even started to feel strong enough to feel like she could go back to work. And then, all of a sudden, she crashed again, and much worse than it was the first time. And so she came back in, and we did more work with her. And through the course of that work, we're able to identify that an actual fallen angel had entered into her in the course of her weakness with this tulpa. So what we removed was the tulpa, not realizing that there was this actual fallen angel hiding underneath the tulpa, and it was trying to go completely unnoticed so that we wouldn't go after the actual entity. And so, that's an example of what happens, is that typically fallen angels, which are very rare. It's very rare to encounter a fallen angel or to be possessed by one. That's not common or typical. But it is what does happen is that when they do seek out an individual or victim to possess, the way they do it is they look for weak links. And typically the weakest links of all are those who are spiritually apathetic and already have minor attachments. They go in and they get in very easily under those attachments, and they hide under those attachments. And then an unsuspecting group that comes in, not fully experienced in this type of thing, thinks that they remove the entity. Then the person really crashes later on. And you got to be prepared for that. That's why sometimes demonic possessions can take weeks or even months to resolve, because you have to constantly wear down that energy pattern until it has dissipated.
So, Bryan, I don't know if we've asked you on radio here, but what can a person do? The chances of possession or any type of hitchhikers can be less likely. Does it actually absolve? If I say a prayer, and I do this all the time when I leave, I go in my car, and I pray to God and pray to my ancestors or whoever, and I just pray for safety. But is that enough? Let me ask you: is that enough, or what else can I do, or what else can somebody else do to help prevent these things from latching on to us?
Sure. The best answer to that is that faith is always enough. And so, if a prayer is said in a spirit of genuine faith, then that is usually sufficient to protect oneself from almost anything. The problem is, the power is not in the prayer. Prayers are not incantations. They're not magical formulas. Same thing with blessed objects, crucifixes, holy water. The power is really not in those things. They're just instruments of grace that are aligned to the faith of the individual. If a person without faith tries to use holy water to eradicate a demonic presence, it's not going to work, because the faith is necessary for the grace in the holy water to activate and do the thing that it's designed to do. So the faith is what makes it work. And so any prayer said in a spirit of genuine faith is going to be effective, provided that it is done sincerely. And I say that because I was asked recently on Twitter, a person wanted to play around with the Ouija board, and they asked me if they said a prayer of protection to St. Michael before they started, would that be sufficient for them to experiment with the Ouija board safely? And prayer doesn't work like that. You can't say, it would be like saying to a police officer, I'm going to go and I'm going to drive my car down the highway at 200 miles an hour. Just be aware that I'm going to do this. Okay, so I'm hoping that you're going to make sure that the road is clear and that you get everybody off so that no one gets hurt. But this is what I'm going to do. No, the police officer is not going to comply with that request, and you're going to be out of luck if you try it. Okay, the same thing goes with God. Okay, you can't trick God into doing something for you that it protects you from something that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. Okay, that's not a sincere prayer. So prayer has to be in a spirit of faith, and it has to be sincere. If you have those two components, then there is nothing that prayer cannot do, or there's nothing that prayer cannot protect you from.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense. Wow. What do you think, Maria?
I understand that it takes a lot of energy to do one of these exorcisms.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's something that wears you down, not just at the time, but it is a continual thing that happens with you?
Well, I mean, it's not continual. It's continual in the sense that every exorcism I perform, yes, there's a massive energy drain. Anybody that's involved in this ministry will tell you, particularly Sister Mary Joan and myself, who are the front line in this work. It's absolutely draining. In fact, you do, as I was saying before, you do, exorcisms might take weeks or months, and the reason it takes that long is that you can't just keep performing one every day. You can't keep having the client come back daily and, you just go right back into it. You might be able to do, maybe 1 or 2 days in a row, maybe 3 days in a row, but that's pushing it. And you start getting weaker because so much of your own energy is being applied to it that you can start becoming vulnerable if you are not careful. Now, Catholic exorcists have tools that can help to mitigate these risks and consequences, and those tools for us are the sacraments of the Church. So, we have confession, or the sacrament of reconciliation, that helps to purify us before we go into an exorcism. We have the Eucharist, which is central to the Catholic faith, that empowers us and unites us to Christ, and is something that we can regularly consume to strengthen us in the work. So this kind of helps to counterbalance the drain that is inevitable with an exorcism. But most of the time, I will never perform more than one exorcism a month. I have had to sometimes do more than one in a month, but I typically get very sick physically if I try to do more than that, because it wears you down, and it literally has a physical debilitating effect. Your immune system becomes compromised. You start to get actually physically sick, and that doesn't help anybody. So we'll do an exorcism. We'll let the client rest. We let the exorcist rest, and then if another one's needed, well, we schedule another date once everybody's strength is back up, and that's just how it has to be. And there's certain things we can advise the client with in the meantime, in the interim, so that the demon isn't getting empowered any more than it normally would be during these intermissions that are necessary for the health of everybody involved. So yeah, it is very draining, but it's not like it's never a long-term thing. So it's not like you do an exorcism, you've done like 20 exorcisms in a year, and now you're in this perpetual state of weakness for the rest of your life. It doesn't really work like that, as long as you take good spiritual care of yourself as well as good physical care. In fact, people laugh at me, but it works. It's important. Sister Mary Joan and I down like 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C before an exorcism, because we need that physical barrier to protect us and strengthen our immune system, so that no part of our personhood is left vulnerable through the proceedings of the exorcism. But as long as you take those proper precautions and you know what you're doing, and you don't overdo it, any kind of negative effects that inevitably come are short-lived, usually just 1 or 2 days.
Wow, that's crazy.
Sherry, when you were talking earlier about investigations and the things that you run into, and that episode, people wouldn't like it, that is more of the norm for a lot of paranormal investigators than anything you'll ever see.
Yeah.
And like you said, people think they want to get into this, and they're going to go hunt ghosts, and they're going to catch voices, and they're going to do this and do that. No, that's not what happens. A lot of times you're left with nothing. And I wish people understood that more, and they could appreciate what professional investigators do. And
see,
it's
that's
hard
the drawback
to get that message across.
Yeah, it is very hard to get the message across, in fact. And, that's part of the drawback, I guess, to shows like Ghost Adventures, where you can tune in every week, and, they're usually, typically, except for last night, there's tremendous evidence but what people don't understand is there's a few things going on there. First of all, these locations are extremely vetted. They typically do not pick a location until they have relatively certain that there's enough there that they'll at least get something. Okay, most average investigators are confined to just their locality, and the Ghost Adventures can go all over the place. And they can go to the biggest and best locations. They can get into places that the average person can't get into. So that helps to create an image that you just go to a location and you're going to get all these tons of evidence like the Ghost Adventures do. No, they're vetting these locations. They're picking these locations. They're going to places where they're most likely to get this stuff. That's number one. Number two, they're spending a tremendous amount of time there setting up all their equipment and sitting there and waiting for things to happen, and so that they can get enough to fill a 42-minute episode. And really, when you think about it, it's actually only about probably 15 to 20 minutes of investigating that you get to see, because they do the backstory and everything else. So all that time that they're actually spending waiting to gather this evidence, you're not getting to see. You don't want to see it because it would bore you to death if you had to sit there for the actual length of time that they do. And then, they go back and they edit it up, and it becomes this perfect episode that looks like, wow, you go out and you get this great EVP, or you get this, real fantastic apparition on full spectrum. But most people are not that patient. Most people don't have the equipment set up to cover a wide number of areas at the same time. And so the amateur paranormal investigator is going to be hard-pressed to get the same kinds of results. And now when you factor in demonic investigation like I do, that's even more rare, because even when we do, like I was saying earlier, you might investigate 100 cases to find the 1 or 2 that are genuine demonic cases. But the fact is, out of that 100 cases, you might get 10 or 20 that are genuine paranormal disturbances. They're just not really genuinely demonic. So you narrow down the possibilities even further when you're talking about looking for actual demonic activity. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a waiting game. It requires a lot of patience. It's not as glamorous as it appears. And it's expensive to do right. You can go on these ghost shops and purchase all of this equipment that you see on television. But, I mean, to really set up the way that a professional team like Ghost Adventures does, you're talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment, really expensive, setups to really do it right and to get everything that you possibly could get out of a location. So, that needs to be kept in mind for people. Then that's not even talking about the safety factor.
Now, the safety factor of going into a place that you've never been into before, holes in the floor, especially if it's an older place. I mean, you could fall or somebody could be hidden in there and attack you, and there's a whole lot of scary stuff that happens that doesn't have anything to do with spirits or demons.
That is exactly true. In fact, some people might be surprised to hear this, and a lot of people I know probably don't even like it. But my attitude is deal with it. But my team is armed. We don't go into locations without being protected on a physical level, and so typically speaking, we have sidearms, and that is one of the benefits of a state that is that supports that legally. Not all states are as open to it as the state of Georgia. It's one of the benefits of living here, though, is that we can protect ourselves, and it's nice to have it. Thank God we've never had to use it. We've never even been in a situation where we even had to think about using it, but it's nice to know that it's there as a deterrent at the very least. But no, we don't do any work without physical protection. It's just par for the course. And because of, publicity and notoriety and exposure, we're even more at risk than the average person would be from, the potential of somebody who doesn't like us being out there. So, we're prepared for those types of scenarios. And it's sad that we have to be in this world, but, it's better safe than sorry. And I don't want to shoot anybody, but if I had to, I would. That's just the way it is, priest or not, bishop or not. When it comes down to survival, I have no tolerance for evil on any level. So, I'm going to protect myself. And,
Bryan, have you ever been attacked from, a really dark entity where you've been thrown or any very malicious attacks on yourself personally?
Never to the degree of being physically thrown. The closest to that would be burning eyes. That's something that happens quite frequently at very extreme exorcisms. If you saw my first ghost adventures, exorcism in Erie, that happened to me, and that is common. That's a common one that, for me, some people do feel shortness of breath, or they feel tightness in their chest, or even the precursors to a heart attack. I've never had anything that severe. The worst that's ever happened to me was the burning eyes and a headache. Part of that I attribute to the fact that, I'm usually several steps ahead of what I'm going after, and the sacraments of the church I am fully dedicated to. And so that gives me a level of protection that a lot of people who don't subscribe to that particular tradition don't have,
Yeah, when you see these different places, where we're going to go, we're hopefully, there's a lot of hauntings and things, but it's just a matter of degrees. It's just hopefully, people are at rest when they cross over. It's just the ones that aren't, or the ones that are elementals, or, we're dealing with that really dark side. So, and it's just, wow, it's amazing. I have a lot of respect in the kind of work that you really do. It's just, you're in the front line.
It really is front line, and it's a lot more tedious than people realize. The dangers and the risks on all levels are always there, and then you still have to deal with the mundane, problems like people wasting your time, or people claiming that they've got something, and it sounds credible enough, and then you go in and you spend all this time investigating, and you find out that it's nothing, and then that could have been invested in an actual problem that might have slipped through the cracks because you were busy tending to that one. And there's not a lot of manpower in this work. I'm always being asked by people, how do I become an exorcist? Well, you can't. You gotta have a vocation to the priesthood, and if you are able to successfully complete that, which could take you, depending upon which tradition you're going into, it could take anywhere between, 4 to 8 years. Then, and only then, after you've been experienced as a priest, would you even be nearly qualified to be considered as an exorcist. So it's hard to get help in this work because the requirements of this particular office are so severe that very few people can actually attain to it.
I can imagine. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a specialized field in what you're in. That's for sure. Jeez.
It really is.
And I saw your show last night, and when I saw the thing, it was like, wow, I'm really glad. Unfortunately, like you said, there are cases where that can be of use in situations that are really of need. But it was good to see. I like to have that, the Libra balance, is being able to see that not every time you go there, oh my gosh, it's like you said earlier, it's not a bells and whistles. Oh, you're going to be performing an exorcism. Sometimes you have to debunk things, and when you do that, there's the balance. It's not all, everything you go in and it's all Hollywoodish and everything. It's not like you said. It's cracked up to be. So it was good to see that there was a different side of investigation, and probably more often than what people realize. And to have people come and say, different things, they don't know. They don't understand what you go through, and they don't have, to me, they only see things one side, and they're always looking. You can't please everybody. That's the way I look at it.
No, you can't. And the more public of a figure that you are, and certainly working in religion, and not just working as a religious figure, but also as a unconventional religious figure, and not only an unconventional religious figure, but an exorcist on top of that, lends itself to a certain amount of scrutiny and controversy that is sort of expected in this. And I certainly, I take that for face value. I accept that that's just the way that it is, even though it can be irritating and frustrating, and particularly with the serious amount of ignorance that I see on a daily basis about this work, which is why I'm so vocal, and I want to educate, and I want people to see the authenticity of it. So I really applaud Zach for having the guts to air that episode, probably knowing full and well. I mean, he's no newcomer to television production. He's been doing this a very long time, and he's very skilled at it, and he's definitely a veteran in the field. He knew, I'm sure, that it was going to be a controversial and poorly received episode, and yet he aired it anyway because that's the authentic work. And he definitely has he's eccentric, okay? Everybody knows that, and they see it. Aaron's got his little jumpiness and the things that have become sort of expected when you see Ghost Adventures. But, outside of the personas that are on television, there's an authenticity there. And, Zach is very adamant about maintaining that level of authenticity. And I think this is the first time that he just threw it out there and let the whole world see what it's really like. And it's not always glamorous, and it's not always exciting, and it's not always entertaining, and sometimes it's just downright wrong, and it's just the way that it is. But I'm glad that people have had an opportunity to kind of see the other side of the work, because that's the part of the work that I get to see most of the time. I'm not, unfortunately, it's how you want to look at it. I would say it's actually quite fortunate that demonic possession is as rare as it is. That's a good thing. We shouldn't be upset about that. But from a Ghost Adventures fan viewer point of view, they want to see demons. Well, you can't make these things happen. You just go in and you look and you investigate, and sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't.
And that's what a lot of people don't understand.
This is off the wall, but why is it that when I watch Ghost Adventures, they always stick Aaron to those? He's kind of like the guinea pig. He always is stuck in the room to do the investigations by himself.
I think
Did
because
you notice that, Bryan?
Oh yeah, and I think that's because he has the best response to these things. I mean, Aaron is very much a very emotional kind of guy. He kind of wears his heart on his sleeve, so he reacts, and it's very genuine. I mean, he's not faking it. That's really his personality. I mean, really, the guys.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yeah, what you see on TV is really the way they are in real life. There's not any difference between their TV personalities and the way that they are off the camera. It's kind of the same way. Maybe Zach's a little bit more intense, if you can believe it, because he's pretty intense on TV too. But I mean, he's even more intense when he's doing his work and setting up shots and making sure that that there's a sterile environment and that that there's not any kind of distractions or outside effects that could come in and interfere or contaminate a particular moment in the investigation. So there's an intensity there, but overall they're great people, and Aaron's just, I think, best predisposed to throwing into these moments where he gets very jumpy, as you saw last night.
Right, and he's always the one that's always in those. Oh, you go in, Aaron. Not anybody else. Him.
Become kind of, I think, an inside joke of the show.
Yeah. I'm glad you're being called in the most severe cases, because I firmly believe, and I have no doubt that you know what you're doing and you can take care of them when you need to. So that's good. It's a big thing of being in service to humanity.
Well, thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that. It was very kind of you to say.
So anyway, well, it's about that time. It's been an hour and a half of the interview, and I want to thank you. We're in the West Coast. I'm in Oregon. Not Zach, but Aaron's from Portland, Oregon, too, in this area. And I know there's a big time difference between you and I really, really appreciate you staying up and being able to be on our radio show again.
It's my pleasure. Anytime.
Take care.
Thank you so much. God bless you both.
Hey, Bryan, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, is there any way they can, if they have a problem or anything, they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, they can. There's really only one way that they're going to get a case considered at this point. We just have so many cases coming in now that it's gotten to a point where, in order to go through or even be remotely considered, you have to go through our intake process. So, there's multiple ways to contact us. Email, you can call the church office, but in the end, what you're going to need to do is go to the website, esotericcatholic.org or nicholean.org, nicholean.org, and click on, in the menu at the top of the screen, click on Request an Investigation, and that will give you the fields that you need to fill out and be as complete as possible. If you just say, I've got demons, and send it, we're probably going to ignore it. You have to give us information. Oh, we get that a lot, Maria. Let me tell you that we get that a lot. I'll get one sentence.
Something tonight. Ooh, there's something going on.
Yeah. I've got demons. That's the biggest
your phone
one
would be ringing off the ringer, wouldn't it be? I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh my God. Yeah, it would be very bad. So I always ask, give me a full, complete story. What's going on? We try to contact everybody. Doesn't mean we're going to take your case, but we will always try to help the best to our ability. We're just a very small ministry that's horribly underfunded, and we don't have manpower to handle all of the volume, so we do the best that we can.
And I wanted to see, are you still taking donations for your cause, Bryan? Because I know way back that are you still doing that?
We are, and they're more important than ever, because a lot of times people will pledge a certain monthly amount, and they make a promise, and we build a budget based upon those numbers. But then what ends up happening is that they 2 months later they cancel the pledge and don't tell us why, or they have some excuse for why they did it. But we can't budget that way. If you make a pledge, we at least hope that you're going to continue that pledge through the year. But if you can help this ministry, it definitely needs more funding in order to continue to do what it's doing. Otherwise, it will start to have to shut down various operations. In fact, we're very dangerously close to doing that. And that's also on the website. There's a section over there that says "Why Donate to Us." You just click on where it says "Click here to find out how you can help us, help others," and it will talk about the ministry. And then there's a donation button as well right there. What we really need, one-time donations are great, but what we really need is monthly, regular support. That's where we're most lacking.
If there's a way I can get a link, I will share that on my personal page and the Paranormal Horizons page, Bryan. I would like to do that.
I'll send it. Yeah, I'll send it to you right now.
Good, and I will do that right away. I'll do that within 10 minutes. I'll get that, at least get that out there. Just spread the word and, get enough people, because I think that what you're doing is it's just amazing. It's a good thing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're pretty active on Twitter.
Thank you.
You're pretty active on Twitter,
Maria,
Bryan. Would you like to share that?
On our other pages that there is. I've got my personal page, the Psychic Medium Sherry, so I can share it on that too.
Yeah, Maria, my Twitter is at Exorcist Bishop. Just go, that's the handle, at Exorcist Bishop.
Wonderful. That's where I pick up on
Twitter,
a lot of...
So.
Yeah, Sherry's Twitter.
I have Instagram, but I don't have Twitter.
I don't do Instagram. I have an Instagram account, but I don't use it.
Oh, my gosh. Well, anyway, thank you so much, Bryan, and we'll have to have you back again before the year's out. We would love to have you back if you can. And, yeah, it's wonderful. Paranormal Horizons is going. I'll be on radio in October, 4 years with Jason. Can you believe that? It's crazy.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
I love it, yes. And Maria's on our team now. She's helping me, and she's just like a sister to me. And when I'm on tour, she fills in for me. So I can't thank her enough for just being there for me. Thank you, Maria.
Oh, you're welcome. She's in Oregon, I'm in Kentucky, and we're as close as sisters should be.
That's wonderful. That's great.
So, anyway, I am going to share your pages. I am going to do that. And thank you, Bryan, for sharing Paranormal Horizons on your page. It's all about networking and getting to the right people and everything. So, yes, do help donate. I'm not trying to ask for, it's just a good cause. And, every little bit helps. And like I said, Bryan's doing a really good cause for humanity. So anyway, we're next week we're gonna go and at our normal time, 8:00, right? 8:00 Sunday Pacific time. And Maria, you're what? You're 11:00.
I am. Yes. Let's see. When we start at 8:00 on the West Coast is 10:00 my time.
Okay, and it's 11:00 Bryan's time.
Yes. So he's been up very late for us tonight.
Okay, well we better kind of shut down, and you're gonna get ready for work too. So
yes, 4:00 in the morning comes soon.
I know. Hey everybody, thank you so much for supporting Paranormal Horizons. We appreciate each and every one of you. And as you look on our page, it's a funny meme page, and it does not reflect our thoughts or our feelings or our emotions. It's just entertainment, something that possibly that you can laugh or bring a smile to your day. So please don't take any of those memes personally. It's just something that is entertainment and hopefully, like I said, to make you laugh or bring a smile to your day. So, hey, we've got over 6,000 followers, and we want to thank everybody for just following us and supporting us. And check out Bryan's page. And Bryan also, once in a while, I don't know how often, but I have heard on his own radio page, he has his own show every now and then. So check him out.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Until next week. Peace.
Yes. Everybody have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next Sunday on Paranormal Horizons.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.